So now I want to talk about neural networks, but specifically I realized that I talked on the previous lesson about supervised learning, what that meant, but I didn't really detail the important part of it, which is that supervised learning is essentially made up of images that you have, right? But each image has an associated label with it. So let's say that, the squares are basically the images, and these X's represent a label. And so let's say that this is a picture of a rose right here, right? So obviously you have the picture of the rose. It looks something like a circle with some petals and stuff. But what a supervised data set or supervised learning means is that this label here, this X, is given to the model. And so we would say X means rose. And so when the model actually looks at it, it's going to be like, oh, this image right here is a rose. And that's what's fed into what's called the input layer. And so the input layer is really just the data layer. And it's consisting of all the images that we have in the training set. And so we might have a picture of irises, sunflowers, whatever it is, and they have the corresponding label. But in the machine learning world, we don't like text, we don't like, images. What we like is numbers, right? That's going to be a key set, right? We're looking for these numbers. So that's what we always want. And so we actually have a key where it's like rose is going to be equal to the number 1. Let's say iris is equal to number 2. And then sunflower is going to be equal to number 3. So what happens is that we pass in all of these images into this input layer. That is at the end of the day going to be what we care about for the data process. And so that is the data. But what we actually want to do after that is the hidden layers. And so these are the hidden layers. The hidden layers are basically where we get all of the mathematical operations. And so once we pass in the pixel data, what happens is that these start performing different kinds of mathematical operations. These are called nodes. So this is like node, and this is a node, and they're all nodes, right? Basically anything in this area is a node. So what happens is that they see these pixels, and they see the associated labels, and they start forming connections. You can see how each node points to every other node, and certain math goes behind the scenes that's beyond the scope of this course. But essentially they calculate what position of these neural networks is going to give us the most correct labels. So what I mean by that is essentially these are going to realign themselves, right? It's a cyclic pattern, and they're going to change how they're oriented, which one is more weighted than the other, which one's basically bigger than the other. They pass into what's called the output layer. So actually, for the case that we're working on here, there's only going to be one number at the end. And that's going to be, for example, it's going to be 2. But what does that mean? Essentially, the output layer, we only think about at the very, very end. So this is during the training phase. Don't even think about the output layer for now, actually. Everything before this line right here is what's called the training phase. That's where the training validation data go on. Basically, we pass in a picture of like a rose, it changes the model, and then it says, we think it's a rose. And then it's like, oh, this is correct based on the label we have. But then let's say we pass in an image of an iris, and then the hidden layers say, oh, this is going to be, a rose, then it says, no, that's incorrect, and has to change the way the hidden layer is. But essentially what happens at the very, very end, I'm going to erase this line, when we have these, nodes oriented in a certain way, then we have the output layer, which is just one node in this case, don't worry about these other ones, that essentially gives us a number. And so based on the mathematical operations, we might get a number like 2, 1, maybe even 3, and so what that means is, let's just say we get 2. Let's not say we get 1 or 3, but those are options. So if we end up getting 1 and we get 2, that means that the model thinks that it is labeled 2 based on the images that we've given it. Then we can go back to the scheme. We can be like, oh, iris is 2, which means that according to what the model gave us, right, this image is an iris. So that's actually how AI models work. When you pass an image or any data to it, it goes off what the hidden layers have oriented themselves during the training phase, and it gives you an output, which is a certain number or certain label that you can then use to provide some data. And so that's just what supervised learning means. It's just that when you give it the labels and when you give it the data associated as well. Thank you.